Welcome back to Rudy's 1/6 World for episode 21 of our new figure showcase, where I'll be doing a quick review / posing session with the newest edition of my collection. And today, we're going to revisit Threezero's ongoing Stranger Things line, and take a look at the inaugural figure in the line. And coming from the upside down, I finally got my hands on the Demogorgon. And this was actually a pickup from Sideshow's Black Friday, Cyber Monday deal, so I was happy to be able to get a discount on him. I did mean to review him earlier, but unfortunately I ended up getting sick and just didn't have a chance. So this is a bit of a catch-up week for me. Also, I did get my shipping notification for Dustin, so he should be in hand relatively soon. So look for that review coming soon. Now, this was the figure that kicked off the line for Threezero. And I'll be honest, it was an interesting choice. Because while the Demogorgon was definitely, I think, one of the key villains during that first season of the show, you would have thought the kids would have been the first out of the gate and the priority. But Threezero did things a little differently. Originally, I wasn't going to jump into the line, not because of the property, because I love Stranger Things, but because Threezero in the past had been a little hit and miss. As a huge X-Files fan, their Mulder and Scully were disappointing to say the least. But what turned me around a little bit was the excellent work they did on the Rambo figure from Rambo 3. It was just a huge step forward and improvement in terms of almost everything. So I gave Threezero the benefit of the doubt and pre-ordered all the kits. And I do have to say, 11 was an impressive figure. And I was definitely very happy with that pickup. And my review is up if you want to check that out. Everything on that one was great. So I have high hopes for this line going forward and for the Demogorgon. And the Demogorgon itself was such an eerie presence in that first season of the Stranger Things show, infusing the entire show with a constant sense of dread. So I'm not surprised they made him, just didn't expect him to be the first release. So let's start by looking at the overall package here, and he doesn't come with much. You get two alternate hands, additional pegs, which are key, and we'll touch base on that more during the review. And he comes with an alternate sculpt. And that's it besides the figure. Although one additional element here is the stand that Threezero is finally providing. Although, as you can see, that's more to do with the fact that the figure is a little bit of a nightmare to pose, and you need the added stability. Not sure what else they could have packed with him, other than maybe a diorama base of sorts for the upside down. But what we're getting does seem reasonable for this particular character. And of course, as we go on with the review, if I think of something else, I'll mention it. So now let's take a closer look at his accessories, and let's start with the hands. And they're okay. The paint on them and on the figure is very glossy. This may be a slight case where in the show the Demogorgon is always in shadows, but when seeing it in full light, it's much more difficult to get that sense of realism. But good color applications and nice detailing on the palms of the hands. I do also like the thin, long fingers, although I do wish the claws stood out a little bit more. But that's a small detail, and I would need to go back and check on the show to see if they got it right. But not bad and interesting, although subtle alternate gestures. The other key accessory here is the stand. And look, I appreciate that we're getting a stand, but I'll start by saying it's not the best. First of all, the base is big, and it does have the Stranger Things logo, which is nice. The post itself is a clear plastic, so I'll give Threezero points for trying to create something low profile that might blend into the background. And it is hinged and articulated, which lets you grab onto the figure in different poses. So the thought process here, it's a good one. The execution, though, not so great. And we'll discuss that as we go into the figure poses. And on top of everything, it ends with a clip at the top that's spring-loaded. But there are also tons of issues with that piece. So with that close look at the accessories out of the way, let's look at the figure sculpt. And we'll start off with the open sculpt, which I think is the more iconic look. And it looks great. I think it's a really great recreation of the creature and the almost open petal-like nature of the head. On top of that, there's a good amount of detail work here with the jumble of teeth on each of the skin petals, as well as the ring of teeth for the main portion of the mouth. And the multi-high gloss reds being used to recreate the interior portion of the mouth is really nicely done. I think it's a solid paint job, and it's very reminiscent of the work Hot Toys had done when they were doing Predator figures on the inner open mandibles. And it just creates that wet look. Only thing I would have liked, and it's something I saw with the Premier Toys Lizard, they could have added some clear plastic elements to create almost a spit or drool-like effect, falling from the mouth and the open petals. I think that would have definitely elevated the sculpt a little bit, and it was a great detail on that lizard figure that I liked a lot. As for the alternate sculpt, it's the fully enclosed head, and look, it's again a great recreation of the folded skin, but it's not the iconic look. So while I appreciate getting it, it's not a piece I would use. Plus, on the figure, it just ends up becoming this brown mass. Just visually not that appealing. The open-headed sculpt provides some nice color contrast between the red and browns to really make the figure stand out. So it's not a bad piece, but not something I would choose for my display. And that actually might be something different I would have liked to see from Threezero. Instead of this fully enclosed sculpt, I think a head sculpt with the petals in the process of opening would have been more visually interesting and might have been something I would have liked more, as I think it would have stood out better. Now, jumping to the rest of the figure, it's a tall figure, as you'll see posed later on with 11 and with some more standard 6-scale releases. So like most big scale figures, it stands out. And I will say Threezero did a good job with the paint apps. And something to draw your attention to, I'm not sure if you can see them on the video because they're kind of subtle on the lens, but pretty evident to the naked eye. But there are these faint blue-green lines around the figure. And at first, I thought someone had marked this up with a pen, and I was going to have to return it. But it's actually supposed to be veins, I guess, running under his skin. So that's the kind of detail that I really appreciate. Besides that, there's great detail work with the skin folds and decent paint applications. I do hate to say this because it's going to come across as a negative, but it really isn't. The paint apps on the figure are a little boring, but they're done well. And I mean, I don't think this is Threezero's fault at all. It's just more of the character design here. But beyond the paint, the design of the figure itself is interesting. There are obviously exposed joints, but at some points, like the lower legs and arms, Threezero actually went with seamless elements. So a nice mix of hard plastic and soft rubber-like material. I personally don't mind joints. I do like posing my figures, so seamless always worries me with the potential for cracking. Here it works, and it's an interesting choice, and all the joints are ratcheted, so the figure is able to hold poses well, which is key with the larger pieces. Vein work I mentioned earlier also carries on to the back of the figure, so there aren't any real shortcuts here, which is nice to see. So overall, I do like the figure and what we're getting here. But just before looking at poses, I mentioned earlier he does need the stand for stability. I tried to get him standing by himself and I just couldn't. Now, it might be 100% possible to do, but my abilities might just be lacking. And I think it's the foot design again. Probably screen accurate, but the figure is so top heavy, and you're trying to balance it on these small feet here that have very small flat zones that are in turn hard to pose so that the flat elements are consistently in contact with the surface. So it's evident where the issue is. So stand is key. So let's discuss the figure overall as we run through some poses. I'll say I think the price that they're asking for is 100% due to the size of the figure. He's big. You can see that next to 11, he towers over her. Add to that this is an original mold, and I get it. I do think the issue with the figure standing by itself does detract from it a little. Now, do I blame Threezero? Not entirely. I think we want accurate representations of what we're seeing on screen. And sometimes I think that creates an issue, and I guess with the proportions of the Demogorgon, you just can't get him to stand straight without the stand. Which brings us to that piece, that stand. This is horrible. Forget the fact that with the glossy black finish, this thing is going to get scratched up by the figure's foot. But it just doesn't do its job well. They really need something like the Hot Toys flight stands with the flexible post. This thing, it just flops around with the figure. And even though it's ratcheted at the joints don't really lock in place, so your figure isn't very stable as it is. On top of that, the clamp is so cheap. It's spring-loaded, but if you open it to fit around the waist like the instructions indicate, you end up stretching the spring so much that it ends up being permanently stretched out, and only really works around the waist. So if you have a pose where you might want to or need to have the stand grab the figure's leg, it's too bad because the clamp and the spring is too stretched out, so it doesn't really grab that piece well. So I'll have to get an alternate stand to really be comfortable with this figure in the display. Otherwise, I really worry that he'll topple over. The other negative, and it's something that happened to me with 11 as well, the pegs. One of the pegs completely came apart on me. Fortunately, just like the ones with 11, I was able to get it back together. But seriously, that's an issue, and it's something I'll be very wary of with Dustin. Beyond that, though, I'm happy to get him. I think the Demogorgon is a solid figure overall and fairly unique. It's not the best figure I've gotten this year, but not the worst. And I think with the Stranger Things kids on display, he's going to be an imposing presence standing behind them. Just like on the show, being that this eerie constant that's coloring every aspect of their first adventure. But again, fairly solid effort from Threezero. Although I will say, I'm happy I got him for 30% off. Had I paid full price for him, I would have been a bit more disappointed. So getting a deal helps his value by a lot. Would I recommend him? I don't know. I think if you want to go all in on this line, he's an important figure, but not vital. I think the real heart of Stranger Things are the main characters, the kids, Hopper, Steve, Nancy, and so on. I don't think the Demogorgon is pivotal for Stranger Things display. For me, I'm happy to have him, but I definitely feel like if I had missed out on him, my display would still be okay. Finally, I did pose him with my easy and simple Air Force officer. Not accurate to the show at all, I know, but it gives you a sense of scale, so definitely more imposing having him next to the kids. I am really curious where the next Stranger Things pre-order will drop, or when it'll drop. Threezero did tease both Will and Mike, so hopefully we'll see those sooner rather than later. And I think there are a lot of characters people would jump at, including some of the adults. So that's a quick review of the Threezero Demogorgon from Stranger Things. And final thoughts, a decent effort overall with some annoying issues. If you are interested in getting him, I would wait for some deals. It feels like this guy is sitting, so I think you might get another chance at 30% off, maybe even with shipping deals, or maybe even a bigger discount. So I don't think there's a rush right now. And like I said, Dustin has shipped to me, so I'm hoping he's on par with 11, because I think that will really set the tone and expectation level for the rest of the line. So what do you think of the Demogorgon by Threezero? If you own him, do you have any of the same issues I do? And what other figures besides the teased Mike and Will are you hoping to get? Let me know, and as always, thanks for watching, and we'll touch base on the next video.